In the interview segment, I had a chat with the former president of the Trade Union Congress, who was a one-time president of Pengassan. Welcome to Dateline Abuja. Former president of Pengassan and former president of the TUC, Comrade Peter Esele. What do you make of the recent restructuring of NNPC, well, the debate concerning it?
I think normally when you have a new policy, there is tendency to have a debate because everybody wants what is good for NNPC. But if you ask me, I think it's welcome because there's one universal agreement that we all have is that NNPC is not functioning optimally. So we have to do something about that. So in the process of doing something, you're going to have people who may not like what you want to do and people who may support what you want to do. But I prefer we do something than do nothing.
And what are we actually talking about? Is it restructuring or unbundling, as we've been seeing in the media and, being debated? What is the actual position and what are the implications of both?
I think first thing was the minister using the word unbundling raises a lot of eyebrows, because if you talk about unbundling, it means that you have to separate the units. And then unbundling may also likely, people may misinterpret it to also mean that likely you want to sell the part of the NNPC. And so when you want to do that, you can only do that by going to the National Assembly. You remember there was a resolution from the National Assembly challenging whatever is happening in the NNPC. I think the minister got the language and suddenly now so changed it to restructuring. And that use of the word unbundling also made the union to also be very, very uncomfortable about it. Because I remember as president of TUC, the same language was used and it was called unbundling of the PHCN. And the then president now had to send a bill to the National Assembly, which of course made it easier for that to be done, which means that you were going to sell the various units in PHCN, which is Power Holdings Corporation of Nigeria. So likelihood that there was a feeling that that may be the road they want to travel, and so everybody has to bring the legal angle. The unions have to come in to also know what's our state, what is the future, and what it all entails. And so that is when you have the debate.
And what are the implications of restructuring? Is this still a major shake-up?
Yeah, I think it has to be a major shake-up, but probably it's still evolving. Because first thing is the minister, I've always been an advocate that somebody who will fix NNPC or who will go a long way, who will put a dent on what has been happening there, will be an outsider. And the minister happens to be an outsider, which is somebody who has worked in the oil and gas, but from not within the NNPC. So most times you look at it, everybody outside have an idea of what should be done. And what the minister is trying to do is give strength to those units. I'll give an example of an MD of the refinery, for example. His approval limit is lower than $100,000, for example, and then you have a problem. You have a problem of $100,000, and then or less, then he has to now write to Abuja, where the GMD is, and the whole thing goes through bureaucratic bottlenecks. So before he gets the approval, it's 6 months down the road. By then he has another problem again, and then he has to go through the same process. So at the end of the day, nothing happens in the refinery. So what the minister is talking about now is that whoever is in charge of that refinery will now have the right to make decisions. And when he makes decisions, and he has to find a way to make sure that the refinery works. So what you have, and which of course is what I think should be done from day one, is that you now have an MD that is giving, he asks for budget. He says, I need X amount of money to get this done. And then the minister gives him the budget that required. He gets his budget, the minister gives him target. You get your budget, you either meet the target or you're fired. So what you have there now is not just that you have accountability, but you also have responsibility. So once you have all of that, I think that is one of the processes where the minister is driving at. So we are hoping that at the end of the day, NNPC will be better off than as it is.
And what about the issue of revenue? I think the Minister of State for Petroleum mentioned that there'll be more revenue as a result of this restructuring. Do you think that will be the case? Yes,
of course. I think one thing for sure, before they decide to go through this route, they would have looked at, for once we are getting the audited account of NNPC being made public, profit and loss is also being made public. So you are seeing more transparency and more accountability. And if that is where we are going, I think it's a welcome development. But what I've always also through informal channels is that you need to carry the unions along. The workers need to know this is what is happening, and you need to have their buy-in. And if you are carrying out a reform, you also need to choose your fight. You know, there are areas I think that are really not necessary. The friction between the minister and the workers, which led to the strike, I think was avoidable. All you needed to do was, okay, let the workers know, because once you use the word unbundling and you are restructuring, and the minister made a statement that the president have said no worker will be laid off by now. That automatically will fly the red flag for the workers. Yeah, if you say now, which means that you are going to at the end of the day also lay off workers. And then the workers will also, okay, fine, let us activate our collective bargaining agreement, which is what ties the management and the workers together. And once you activate it, everybody knows that, okay, fine, let's have a roundtable conversation. If there had been that roundtable conversation, we would not have had a strike.
But what about the issue of job security for workers? In your experience of being the president of the TUC, what concerns do you have in relation to the implications of the restructuring?
Yeah, what workers will want to know is, first of all, what is our fate? If you want to restructure, how many people are going to lose their job? And if they are going to lose their job, what are they going home with? What is the pay? Are you going to respect the collective bargaining agreement? And one of the major problems, which if you read the memorandum between the NNPC workers and the minister, is also the issue of pension. NNPC pension is not one of the best funded. So workers will always also want to know, okay, what happened to our pension? And if you say you're unbundling, and the first thing the worker is going to think about, you're unbundling, you want to sell. So you're unbundling, that means you want to sell. We are used to that. I was Pengassin president, we've also heard unbundling. I was TUC president, I also looked at, I sat through that of the PHCN too. So the first thing that comes to the head of the average worker is that, okay, they likely want to sell. Even if government comes around and give assurances that we are not selling, no worker is going to buy that. It doesn't matter whether it's Buhari's administration. The way the unions think, the way we think is that we don't think in terms of individual, whether it was Jonathan yesterday or Basenjo, or you have President Buhari now. No. The way the workers will think is that we have a government in place. And over the years, government tells us one thing and they do something different. So if you want us to listen, so why don't you talk to our leaders? And then it's in black and white. You have nothing to hide. And it makes it easier for the workers to make a decision and also follow you to restructure. When some people were saying, I read several people on the blog condemning the workers and saying that they are also I said, no, supporting corruption. What is that? I said, no. Workers, Pengassin that I've known, we've always been part of asking for restructuring of NNPC. We're part of OGIC under Obasanjo, part of the PIB, which is Obasanjo, Yar'Adua, and President Jonathan. And so workers want to keep their job, and the only way they can keep their job is if NNPC is functioning optimally. Well,
talking about corruption, you mentioned that. Will the restructuring actually help alleviate corruption?
I think what it can do, I have always said that you actually cannot completely knock off corruption in a third world that we have. But what we need to do is to put a system in place. You see, each time we talk about corruption and then we tie individuals around it, it's not going to work. It's a failure of system. So once you have that systemic failure, that is when corruption will be able to grow and become a monster. So our attention should be, where is our problem? First of all, what is it that we're not doing right? So how do we correct it? I don't need MEC to be there for things to move on. But because there's a process, if MEC goes there, she knows that she has to do the right thing or she's fired. But whereby you have a system that is not working, anybody comes in there and they want to make a kill. I read today now that the General of the Federation talked about over 3 trillion non-remitted from NNPC. And you ask yourself, how did that happen? You know, how can you explain that to any sane country, that 3.2 million naira didn't get into Federation account? How did that happen? That's a huge systemic failure. So when the process...
If it's the case, I mean, that's an allegation.
Yes. Yeah. But if that is coming from the Auditor General, is alleging that, and he's saying that in the front of the National Assembly. So what you now need to ask yourself is that there's a complete failure in the various processes. Even the National Assembly is supposed to be aware of that long ago. They're supposed to be the one to summon the Auditor General. So it tells you that the system is not working. So how do we ensure that the system is not tied to individual? How do we ensure that the system needs to run whether Mr. Kachuku is there tomorrow or not? How do we ensure that the system runs whether President Buhari is there or not? The problem we're having now is that we are hearing all of these allegations because of the person of the president. It's anti-corruption war. That is why we are hearing all of these allegations. Is that supposed to be the case? No. Where system work is not supposed to be tied around the individual. So if tomorrow President Buhari leaves, he has a 4 years, maximum 8 years. So if he leaves, are we going to go back to the status quo? So our attention should be on building our institutions, building our processes, and making sure the system works.
So looking at things from an institutional perspective rather than an individual perspective.
Yes.
But do you think there's any correlation between what's happening now and also what's been going on in relation to the proposals for the petroleum industry bill, where they're also looking at breaking up the corporation? Do you think there's some correlation?
Yes, there is, but they can't go far. They can't go as far as the PIB bill, because one of the things about the PIB is that you're going to have, there's going to need a whole lot of legal backing to do what they want to do. So the first thing is, if the processes are right, what he's doing now can work. What we just need to do is, first of all, is to keep those processes, strengthen the various institutions within the framework of NNPC or the Ministry of Petroleum. And once we're able to achieve that, I've always said it, I say in Nigeria, we have, in terms of policy, we're a first world country. But the discipline and the commitment to follow through is why we are a developing country. That is what we lack. We lack the discipline, we lack the commitment. And once you have that, that is missing, no matter what you do, you are not going to get there.
Thank you, Comrade Peter Esele, for now. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion on the NNPC.
NNPC is still a whole. It is not different companies. It is simply divisional breakups. And under those divisional breakups, you have subsidiary companies that are now focused on business. Now, those are going to be run by managing directors. The business breakups are going to be run by your former GEDs that are being called chief operating officers or chief executive officers. And the whole idea is to focus everybody to the fact that it is no longer an administrative role. It is no longer a coordination role. It is a business-focused role. You have to deliver numbers.